with David Koepp, a screenwriter, but he is also a director. On behalf of Dee, Bethany, and Gretchen, our workers, and our owner, Mari Curley, my name is Mike Takeuchi, and welcome. Thanks for coming. David Koepp is the 9th top grossing screenwriter in all of film. Is that correct? Up there.
Sounds
Yeah.
Sounds encouraging.
His movies, I'm just blown away because, as a lot of you know, he wrote the first Jurassic Park movies, Death Becomes Her, Mission Impossible, The Paper, one of my favorites, CARLITO'S Way, the 2002 version, the proper version of Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, Panic Room. He's worked with directors including Ron Howard, Steven Soderbergh, David Fincher, Robert Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, his good friend Brian De Palma, and you've worked with him more than once, I think.
Yeah,
and
right.
he's
3 times.
And he's also a great director. If you've ever seen the 2012 movie Premium Rush with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, it's a very action-packed movie that I found very exciting. So please welcome David Koepp. Well, you came from Minnesota. You worked in Wisconsin. And you worked at McDonald's. Okay, sorry.
Minnesota's vastly
I'm doing really
inferior
well
to
here.
Wisconsin. Don't get me started on Iowa.
Okay, all right. Or Illinois or Ohio. Wisconsin. But you worked at a McDonald's.
Yes.
And I gotta ask, when you were working at McDonald's, did you think about making movies, writing for movies?
I thought mostly about not working at McDonald's. That was my, if I could move toward that goal, then everything would be great. As a teenager, I wrote stories, and I wanted to be an actor. Mm-hmm. So I went to college for theater, but kept writing. And I remember I had a professor who was directing me in a play and also the playwriting professor. And I think I asked what he thought of my performance in something, and he told me he thought I was a wonderful writer. Which I can read between the lines, or on the line in that case.
So as an actor, you're a wonderful writer? Is that
I think that's the story.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I kept writing. I wrote more and more, and then I applied to film school at UCLA and happily got in.
When you were a kid, though, did movies grab you?
Oh God, yeah.
Like what? Like, give me an example of what you really. Well,
back in the day, you watched what was on.
Yeah.
And there was ABC, CBS, NBC, and then the local UHF station. And so I watched what they had. So The $1 Million Movie was a lot of old movies. I really enjoyed that. Hitchcock kind of blew my mind when I was about 12.
Wow.
And I got very into the old Sherlock Holmes movies. They'd play them on Friday nights on the UHF channel.
Oh, with Basil Rathbone. Yeah.
Any Godzilla movie at all, I love. And then there was what was in movie theaters, which I went to a ton of movies, and that was I really kind of came of age those crucial years when you're like 14 to 22, and everything you take in sort of forms who you become.
Yeah.
And for me, that was 1978 to 92, or no, I'm doing the math wrong.
Okay.
It was around then. So I had a lot of really great stuff to choose from. Late 70s, early 80s cinema was fantastic.
Yes.
So that was the stuff that kind of formed me.
Interesting. And you knew you wanted to do film right away when you went to UCLA?
Oh, yeah. But before then, I knew it when I was in Wisconsin. I was going to Madison at the time. And I knew movies were what I wanted to do.
So at UCLA, we had talked a little bit before, it wasn't so much the faculty that influenced you more, it was your peers, your fellow students.
Yeah.
And why were they more memorable than your teachers?
Because you are at exactly the same point in your career, which is nowhere. And we've all come from somewhere else. There were a couple people that were from LA.
Okay.
But almost everybody else was from somewhere else. And you've come to, it's very corny, but it's a real thing. You've come to Hollywood with a suitcase and a dream, and you want to pursue your dreams. And so we would trade material and we'd trade ideas, and we took each other seriously. And it was the first time, you know, in small town Wisconsin, you're weird and stupid if you want to go into movies, but in there, suddenly that's all anybody else wants to talk about either. And you take each other seriously, and you support each other, and you try not to be too awful when you read each other's stuff, because if you're mean, you know, a few weeks from now when they read yours,
They're getting back to you.
And I think all writers need a community for some encouragement.
Which is ironic because that's the opposite of what Hollywood is perceived to be, as far as it's pretty cutthroat compared, but you have this collaborative
But
environment.
you're also very
It's like-
competitive with each other.
Yeah.
It is, you know, Hollywood is a bunch of frogs in a jar trying to get
Yeah.
on top of each other. But that's because all the oxygen is up at the top. You know, so I remember a friend of ours sold a screenplay while in film school. Don Mancini, and God, how we hated him.
Oh yeah.
Very nice guy, but he sold the Chucky script, the horror script, and it was very upsetting to the rest of us. You could imagine how destabilizing.
Yeah. Congratulations, but you know, pull the knife out.
Yeah.
Or something like that. You also had one of my favorite filmmakers as a classmate is Alexander Payne. Wonderful. I mean, Nebraska, The Descendants. He's done so many.
Fantastic. He was getting his master's when I was getting my bachelor's, but the whole program kind of mixed together, and you worked on each other's films.
Could you tell he had the talent? He had what it took at that time.
Yeah, you can kind of spot the winners right out of the gate, and he was very confident and knew what he was doing. He took a long time, so we made fun of him for being slow.
Yeah.
But then they were brilliant, and you'd say, "Oh, I see. Okay, fine, you win."
It's not necessarily the pace of like a Jurassic Park that always wins.
Oh, I just meant the pace at which he worked. But because he was fastidious and careful, but boy, does it pay off.
So when did you realize that you had a knack for writing?
I knew that I enjoyed it. I think it's always up to other people to say if you have a knack or if you're any good or not good. But I knew I enjoyed it from the time I was 12. I always wrote things and wrote little stories, and they got longer and longer as I got older, and my patience was greater.
Did you write for your classmates then when you were younger?
Not really. They were for me. I just enjoyed the process. I just liked. I read once. This was later in my early 20s. Somebody said, if you want to write, you have to fall in love with the daily process of putting words on paper.
Yes.
And if you can do that, you win, and it'll show in your work. But if you're in it for anything other than the doing of the work, it's probably not going to work.
So when you wrote, were you shy about sharing originally then?
No, I wanted people to read it and like it, but I didn't show it around. I'd show my parents, I'd show a friend or two. It's as you go further into the world, you have no choice. You must share. If you want to get anywhere, you got to show it to people.
In the meantime, though, it looks like you've worked a few years. What did you do after college immediately? Did you go right into writing, or did you?
Well, I paid the bills while writing.
Okay.
Hoping for things to work out.
Not McDonald's, though.
It wasn't. No, I had a job. I worked for a guy who was a film distributor's rep, and we would, we'd buy like B and C movie titles for distribution in foreign countries. I remember buying Sorority House Massacre 3. They said, watch this movie and tell us if it's any good. I watched it and I said, it's terrible. You should definitely buy it. They'll love it.
How did it do?
I think it did well in Australia. Thank you for
All
asking.
right, so you're really big in Australia then.
Yeah, it wasn't my movie, but it was a good purchase.
All right, so writing screenplays, I have to ask you, you have all the story built up, but when you write a screenplay, you only write about 100, 110 pages or so, because what is it, like a page a minute?
Depends, yeah.
For dialogue?
I'd say 106 is about as short as I'll go. But a longer script, I did a first draft of something that was 202 pages. I mean, I didn't turn it in until it was 150, but that area. Yeah.
What is that like writing as opposed to working on a novel, which we'll get to in a little bit?
Well, aside from the sheer amount of typing involved in a novel, I mean, some novelists do a lot of drafts. I find screenwriting really benefits from a burst of activity in which you produce a draft, think about it, burst of activity, you do another draft, and for dozens of drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Subsequent drafts of a novel, and I've only done 2, so I'm surely no expert, but they're so hard to rewrite, you know, because you're pulling things out, and it's like a molar coming out with, you know, blood and tendrils, and because a book should flow from thought to thought, whereas a screenplay can be a little bit more modular, as you know, and you work on your segues, and the story has to flow, but it's not quite the way a train of thought progresses in a book. It's just it's a much harder business of undoing and redoing.
When was the moment you realized, I mean, when you started working, I mean, you have 45 plus titles, I think, screenplays and whatnot, I think.
I think about 30 that were made,
Okay.
but
30.
surely a drawer full of things that were unproduced.
When did you start realizing that you know,
It's more
you
my
could
cabinet, actually. Sorry.
So when did you realize that you could actually, you know, you can actually make a living doing this full time? You can quit your so-called day job.
When someone wrote me a check that allowed me, the minute I was able to write a check, not pay any tax on it, and quit my job, and then I made up the tax later.
What movie was that?
What allowed me to quit? Probably the first movie I made, which was an independent movie called Apartment Zero. Only a budget of about $1.2 million, I think, most of which we raised on our own. We managed to take enough of a fee. You know, I was in my mid-20s, so I could live very cheaply. That it got me to my next hired writing job, which was after that.
Wow. So that must have been really hard to do to raise the money because this is pre-crowdfunding. So did you really have to?
Yeah, we were very naive. We were young, and you know, we borrowed. You know, it was the classic of borrowing against credit cards. You know, we convinced actors, a couple decent actors, to be in it when we had no funding, and then we went and convinced a video company that we had these actors and a start date. We just picked a start date, so that's when we're starting.
Wow.
They bought the video rights, and then we took it to a bank and borrowed against it. A lawyer we knew how to do that. It was a lot of just fly by night, and we went in with no money for post-production. We did not know how to finish. So everything I earned for the next 2 years actually went into paying off the bills from having made that movie.
Wow. There's a line in one of my favorite movies by Hirokazu Koreeda. He wrote in this movie, I wish, and the boy asks, what's indie mean? And indie means you have to work harder.
Yeah.
And it seems you really have to work.
Everything is harder. I remember when I finally got to the first studio movie I made, I was just astonished at how easy they made it for you. There were whole departments that do things that I used to do in my bedroom.
But you have a little bit less, or maybe a lot of less freedom, correct, as far as what you wanted to write?
The more money they give you, the less freedom you have.
Okay.
No question about it. They are interested in looking after their investment.
Well, you're writing for a whole, you know, everybody contributes. And I wanted to ask before you talk about the books, is writing for a collaborative effort, and what is that like as opposed to just writing?
It's a drag. It's great when people give you good ideas, and when you get input that makes it better than you might have done it. But you know, I think anybody writes anything because they have an idea about how they think it ought to be, and you paint something because you think that's how it ought to look. And the thing about movies is because you need $1 million or 10 million or 100 million of someone else's dollars, others are going to get involved, and they too would like it to be the way they see it. So every movie I do, after about the third draft, I sort of say goodbye to the script.
I was going to ask.
I mean, I stay on and work on it and try to do the best I can with the notes I'm given, but it's no longer going to be just mine and the way I see it. What I've enjoyed about writing both these novels is it's the way I see it. And the notes in the publishing industry are so genteel by comparison. They say, if you wouldn't mind, and you're wondering if you like it, this is a suggestion, and you'll do what you'll do. And I kind of giggled the first time they gave me notes, because I was like, you guys, that's not how it is in the movies.
Yeah. There's no giggling in the
They
movies.
jump out of the bushes and they collaborate with you, and it's a very scary process.
So, my next question is, how is that, I mean, did you just go crazy when you decided you wanted to write cold storage? Like, because you had all this freedom, and you had all this autonomy, you could take the story where it wanted to go. Was that an adjustment for you?
Yeah, it was a great adjustment. I wanted to do that because I think I had in the back of my head I love to read books. I'm buying Tom Perrotta's new book as we speak, and I love to read, and I always thought, gee, it would be fun to write a novel, or it wouldn't. It would be torture either way. And so I started with what I thought was a movie idea, and I thought, let me see if I can do some half-decent prose, just to describe this character. I wanted to write a character arriving at a job he hated. So I started writing, and I thought, well, this is fun. And after a couple pages, I thought, I don't want this to be a movie. I'm going to do this as a book. Actually, I didn't admit it was a book till about page 50, but I want to write this for myself. I don't want to tell anybody I'm doing it. I don't want to tell anybody about it. I want no expectations and no phone calls. I just want to see what it's like. And it was joyful. Just a great time doing it.
How long did that process take you then?
That was on and off for 4 or 5 months, because I had some other stuff I had to do for movie stuff. And then when it was done and it was time to send it into the world, I was anxious because it was mine and it was beautiful. It was my child. I didn't want anybody to tell me it's ugly. But happily it was well received, so that was cool.
And I mean, it got a lot of critical acclaim, and I think they wrote, somebody compared you to Noah Hawley and Andy Weir.
Fine with me.
Yeah. I mean, Andy Weir, of course, wrote The Martian and Project Hail Mary. Noah Hawley, actually, he writes books, but he's more known for, I would say, Fargo. His development of the show Fargo.
He's really prolific. He's great.
But how did you take that? How did you take the world accepting your first piece of prose, your first novel?
It was great. I mean, it went over very nicely, and I was happy to. I'm used to, because I've done a lot of movies. I'm used to the big successes, but also, really debilitating public humiliation, which is a part of being in the circus. And that's just the way it is. I've had big failures, which were, at least partially my fault, sometimes all my fault. And I've had things that have gone well, and so I'm a little inured. I have 4 kids, and there's a point with each of them where they discover that they can Google me, and then they'll say, they'll either say, hey, something positive, or they'll come in with a terrible look on their face and say, do you know what,
Variety magazine
Jerk Off 107 said about you? And I'm like, no, but I bet it's really terrible, and sit down, let me tell you. It's a life in the circus, and they're going to throw elephant shit at you. And so I was prepared for the book to be excoriated, because Hollywood screenwriter writes novel. That usually they don't like, but I did seem to get away with it.
Interesting. So it didn't chase you away because you wrote this book, Aurora, which is a wonderful book, everyone. Kirkus Reviews, which is like the Variety or Hollywood Reporter of books, said that Aurora's engaging characters deal with disaster in this swiftly paced, well-written thriller. And it really is a very well-written thriller. It's very enjoyable. My coworkers can attest. It made me cranky because I spent half the night reading it once. And my wife over there, my poor wife there, she had to deal with me as well. But it's well worth it. It's a page turner. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So if you could talk a little bit about it, and you want to read, or do you feel like reading? It's up to you.
Yeah, I'm going to read a paragraph. Because
Okay.
there's a paragraph in it.
All right.
Well, there's more than one. I'm happy with
Maybe you could set up
upwards
with,
of 7.
you could set up with just the elevator pitch.
Okay, so I got very interested in the idea of a worldwide power outage. First movie I directed, like the mid '90s, was about a blackout, but it was limited. It was 3 days and 3 people, and they're confined together. I got very interested in what if this is worldwide, and I wanted to see that there's a very believable reason why this can and likely will happen. Just maybe not today or tomorrow, but. The sun belches out a lot of electromagnetic plasma every single day. Once every couple hundred years, it impacts the Earth directly. The last time that happened was 1859. It's called the Carrington Event, knocked out telegraph systems all over the world. But in 1859, we weren't addicted to electric power, and everything we did wasn't on a grid. And it is now. And I wanted to see I didn't want to tell like a big global disaster story, but I wanted to see what 2 little communities. One which is exceptionally well prepared, this billionaire character who's got a disaster bunker all set to go, and the other, his sister in Aurora, Illinois, who is completely unprepared. Her life is a bit of a mess, and she is not in any way prepared for this event. And then I wanted to see if their paths might cross, if unexpected things happen to both of them, and things either come together or fall apart. That was the story I wanted to tell, and so I did, and it's in this swell book. I'm stalling while I try to find the page I wanted to read. So Aubrey, who is the sister character, it's about a brother and a sister, and it alternates between their points of view, and then, spoiler alert, comes together in a climactic way. And they have a sort of tragic teenage incident that has caused a terrible rift in their relationship, and he's gone on and become extremely wealthy and ready for anything, and her life has continued to fall apart. So we've just come from Tom, her brother, who's on his way to his disaster bunker, and everything's going great in his life. And she's at home with, well, you'll see. What was suddenly clear to Aubrey was that she'd learned exactly nothing from COVID. Well, that wasn't entirely true. She'd learned once again that unexpected events do happen in life, and they can last way longer than you'd ever imagine, with much more far-reaching consequences. Therefore, it's only basic common sense to stock up on supplies and hope the dreadful day never comes. She'd become mindful of the fact that she was no longer a solitary person in this world, but rather the sole caregiver for a moody teenage shithead, and that she had a moral obligation to be prepared to provide for them both. Things happen. Be ready. Her first step, 18 months ago, had been to find out exactly what a person would need in the next big emergency. She Googled Basic Home Disaster Kit and found hundreds of hits to choose from. The first few were sponsored, overpriced duffel bags jammed with too much of the wrong stuff. But a few links down, she found an article with a .gov suffix, so she clicked on that. The handy checklist seemed to cover everything, not just for another deadly virus, but for earthquakes, fires, power outages, even a dirty bomb explosion. Dutifully, she'd printed it out and taped it to the rust-proof black steel storage rack she bought on Amazon for $200, and left just around the corner from the basement stairs. Aubrey stood in front of the rack now, staring at the 2-page disaster checklist, which she'd even laminated before taping it to the support on the right side. The rest of the rack was completely empty. So, like a lot of us, we know something's gonna come, something unexpected's gonna happen, and we might be ready for the last crisis, but there's no way we're ready for the next crisis. And even after researching and writing that book, I've done nothing. I'm completely unprepared. I have no bottled water, no extra batteries. I have nothing that I might need, because it's easier to pretend it's not going to happen.
Interesting. You did write this during COVID, the end of 2020, correct? You did a bulk of it.
Yeah, it was summer and fall of 2020.
And COVID is, I'm not revealing anything, but COVID is touched upon in this book. They lived through COVID, now they're living through this event.
Yeah, I think you have to, because we all did live through it and it changed us all. So you have to carry, I think your characters have to have experienced the same thing. If you're writing a contemporary novel. Or you can pretend COVID never existed, but that's kind of weird. It's a bit of a dilemma for popular entertainment right now.
I really felt bad for all your characters because they had to go through 2 disasters.
Yeah.
Speaking of characters, I think that's one of the strongest parts of this book is it really tied the threads together. You had so many wonderful characters, from Aubrey and her brother Tom, spelled Thom, and it has to do with Thomas Edison.
He idolized Edison and wanted
Edison.
everybody to look at him the same way, so he kept the H in his nickname.
And then there's several others, including my favorite, Norman, which is an older gentleman scientist in that. And he was actually, most of these are made up characters, but he is actually kind of based on somebody, isn't he?
Yeah, Norman's, well, he has a lot of my dear departed friend, William Goldman, the great writer of books and movies. Norman's 88 years old and finds it impossible to censor himself in any way when talking to people. And Bill was very much like that. I remember I was going through a painful episode in my life, and I was telling him my latest sorrow, and he said, well, you're either keeping a journal or you're an asshole. And I said, well, yeah, why is that? And he said, because this is good shit. You're going to use this. I love him for that.
Did you journal?
No, I'm an asshole.
Okay.
I did not keep the journal.
But the other characters which were made up, all were just, they're wonderful, they're individual, they're very, they all have pretty big faults. And I'm wondering where you got your inspiration to create these characters and be able to tie it together the way you did.
I think you use some of the people you've met in life, and you use a lot of yourself in every single character. And I think the most flawed character in the book is Tom, her brother, who's impatient and petulant and has a rather superior attitude to everyone around him and expects everything now and is an enormous narcissist. And he was great fun to write because I just drew on all my worst qualities and exaggerated them. Thoughts I have but don't say out loud, and he says them all, and he was. And then the fun thing in the story is, can I bring him back? Can I have him travel a path that makes him a palatable human being again?
And tying them all together, was that a challenge or was that fun for you?
Both. On a good day, it was fun. On it's very. I mean, some authors do it with great ease. I don't. But there's 2 distinct stories. There's actually 3, and there's a little sneaker story in there too. And knowing just when to go to the other one so we don't get bored or angry is difficult. So I found that very challenging. It's nice in the last 100 pages when everybody's, the orchestra's playing together. It's all fine, but up till then, it's tricky.
Other than that, did you encounter problems, struggles?
Yeah, the internet. It's horrible. It's every one of us is in a horrible battle with our phone. Like we can't, attention is not what it used to be. Our attention span, and I think it's a real impediment to getting anything done. So that I know that's not exactly the question you asked, but I think it's the question of our time.
So in regards to the story, were you able to guide it along and put it in the direction you wanted, or did the story just kind of guide you along?
I would love to be one of those people that says, no, I let it flow and it just all comes to me. I drag that thing up a hill. It's writing is hard, bending it to your will, knowing when to listen to the voice that says this doesn't work. That stuff is a daily bloodbath. Well, it's tricky.
It's a nice book.
Yeah. It's a good title. A nice bloodbath.
when you know that feeling that you had something, I want to be a writer. I want to know what an author feels like when they had the story and what they were thinking, where they were, how they were feeling at the moment when you just realized it all came together.
When some part of it is working, you mean?
Just in general, when the whole project you're thinking, you can see it's not completely, the puzzle's not completed, but you can see it forming and it's shaping to something that you want.
Yeah. I don't think there's a breakthrough moment, you know? I think you have a ton of little breakthroughs if all's going well. And bit by bit, you bring it along, you know? But there's no bolt from the blue thing, you know? It happens, inspiration occurs during composition. So while you're working, you're making it better and better. Hopefully. Some days you screw them.
You didn't screw this one. So.
Yeah, you just didn't see those drafts.
Okay. So, do you want to keep writing books? I know you're going to keep writing screenplays, which we'll talk about in a second. But do you want to keep writing books?
Yes, it's great fun. I have another one in my head.
Already.
So, well, it's in my head.
Okay.
That's not really saying much.
Okay. It's kind of in the clouds and the
It's like
upside down world.
15-year-old
like that.
saying, my paper's done, I just have to type it up.
But you're still doing screenplays, and speaking of which, first Cold Storage is being adapted by Paramount.
No, now it's Studio Canal.
Studio
Paramount,
Canal.
everybody got fired.
Okay.
We took it, as happens, we took it over to Studio Canal. So
All
we're supposed
right.
to start shooting. We were supposed to start shooting in October. Now I think it'll be January.
So do we still have Liam?
Liam Neeson and Joe Keery,
Joe Carey
And
is
actress.
Steve, the hunky guy from
Stranger Things,
Things.
and an actress to be named.
All right. And you are writing the screenplay, or you wrote the screenplay?
I did, and a British director named Johnny Campbell is directing this.
So what was that like then, as far as condensing it down to a screenplay size?
I kind of had it in mind. You can't, write scripts for 30 years and not sort
Yeah.
of be thinking that. So I had some ideas about how to do it. It was fine. I'm working on the script for Aurora now, and for Netflix, and it's been harder. It requires more interpretation instead of just transposing.
Yeah.
So, but that's also a function of the director, because the Catherine Bigelow,
Catherine Bigelow
director.
is directing. So
She has a very clear point of view on the world. Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30 and her great movies, and it's so when you work with somebody really good, you want to try and see it through their eyes, because it has to be in their tone and their voice, because then they'll do it well. So, but that's kind of fun. The movie will be a bit different from the book. Same story and characters, just different.
is it going to be difficult for you to give that up? I mean, that viewpoint up?
No, because unless she buys and burns all copies of the book, the book still exists, and that's one thing, and the movie will be another.
I guess that's better than if you gave up the screenplay. Like if you wrote the book
When somebody
and
else
somebody
writes
else wrote the screenplay.
that'd be gross.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of yucky. Most authors that I've written, I've adapted their script.
Yeah.
They not only don't want to talk to me about it, they never want to meet me. It's
Was Crichton still alive?
because he is not.
No, was he alive
Oh,
at the time that you wrote?
Sorry. Yes, and we never met. I adapted 2 of his novels, and we never were in the same room together.
Wow.
I think it's like if somebody goes out with your old girlfriend, you really
Don't want to.
no, God no.
Yeah. What I'll ask one more question, and if you guys have a question, the joy. What kind of joy do you just get out of writing, out of putting pen to paper? I'm just curious.
Depends on the day, Great when it goes well. Horribly cranky when it doesn't. We're trying you're trying to make the world comport more with how it is in your head, and if you can't make that work, that's very depressing. But if you do make it work, it's exhilarating. So it's still fun. You can't master storytelling. You can only try each time and hope to hope it works this time.
That's very encouraging for writers to hear.
Or depressing.
That's true. That's true. Your kids, last question. Your kids, I mean, they're well aware. I mean, Grace is your youngest, right?
Yes, she's a little.
And she's a big reader. Do your other kids, they realize what you do, and are they, how aware of what you do are they?
They're aware because I work at home, and so they wander out and see me doing it. And sometimes like a movie will come out and they'll know of it. I think they're pleasantly unbothered or don't think about it all that much, which seems healthy to me.
All right.
It's hard if you have a big movie come out and it's poorly received, and your kid happens to be in like 5th grade or something. That's unpleasant because they get some shit at school.
Yeah.
And then you give them the circus speech and hope they're okay.
Hope they're okay.
Yeah.
If not, you're paying for
Most
a lot
of the
therapy.
time, yeah. Most of the time, like most kids, they're pretty uninterested in what you do for a living,
Yeah.
which is good.
That's great. Do you guys have any questions that you want to ask David? Anything about the book, about movies?
Yeah, you guys.
Anything.
I'm gonna call you by name, and then you're gonna be sorry.
Claire? No.
We could. Should we stop and speak more casual?
Yeah, we
Okay.
could go ahead and stop. I'll just turn this off.